So hi, we are on the second day of the SecT conference, and we have Richard with us, who just came off stage, and you were giving us a crash course in fuzzing, sort of.
Yeah, I know the acronym eBPF, but today I learned that there's a VM inside of it, and a lot of things like so basically the Berkeley packet filtering, I can't speak, but you had done proactive research into an eBPF library thing, and then it just suddenly happens that Microsoft decides that they're going to make this golden.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, first of all, I teach fuzzing, and fuzzing is a big interest of mine. So most of my talks end up being a platform for trying to pass on some education and showing people there's opportunity there for doing their own research. But yeah, the subject for this talk was a new eBPF platform for Windows. And of course, it's been around in Linux for a long time, but Windows is adopting a similar system for allowing you to do packet filtering at high speed, designed for endpoints in the cloud and collecting telemetry and things like that. And yeah, most people, if they've heard about Berkeley packet filtering at all, they think of it in the older technology stack that is designed for doing simple filtering like through TCP dump or Wireshark or things along those lines. And about 10 years ago, Linux extended that interface so you can do hooking and also have much more powerful programs that can do analysis of packets and not just simple filtering.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what took you on that path, so to speak? Why did you start looking at that, or did you have prior information that Microsoft would be looking at this?
Yeah, no, it was actually first I started looking at the Linux side, actually, because the last 3 or 4 years there's been an uptick in local kernel privilege escalation vulnerabilities there, and also for red teaming and kind of attack tooling. And so I gave a talk last fall about how to use the Linux side to write attack and defense tooling. So that talk was about how to implement a code verifier as you load programs. And then also on the offensive side, I showed how to basically rootkit processes on the fly. So I was already looking at the Linux ecosystem, and outside of what the Linux kernel provides, I noticed that there was some new third-party open source projects that were related that took basically this virtual CPU that is what executes this bytecode, or it jits it to native code, to execute these filters. I saw that there was a library independent of the kernel implementation, and I saw opportunity there because this could replace things like Lua or V8 and other virtual CPUs that run sandboxed code. And so I already started fuzzing that. And then just by accident, through doing more searches on those libraries, UBPF and Prevail, I realized that, Microsoft is getting into the game, and last May 2001, they announced that they were going to implement it, and early this year, about a year later, they finally had a functioning first implementation that does the network layer stuff, and they had ported the Cilium load balancer, which is used in Kubernetes in the cloud, to the Windows platform at that point. And so it was complete enough for me to actually go test it. And since I'd already tested some of the components they were using, I saw that as a huge opportunity, and was excited about the new technology stack.
Sort of knew where to start looking, at least.
I already felt as though, some of the work I did before would probably pay off, because I didn't report all those bugs at the time, because when you fuzz a library independently, it's hard to know if those bugs will be reachable in a real piece of software. So I wanted to wait until they were in a service. Also, these projects are developed by one guy or girl sitting, doing a passion project, and so you don't want to overload them with a pile of crashes that are kind of discouraging in their efforts. And so I waited until something came about, and I was lucky enough for it to be a big player like Microsoft.
So, like if we go back to basics, why have they selected to run their own VM here instead of like doing native code for these options?
Well, one thing about using a virtual CPU is that once you adopt it, then you can have cross-platform code that runs on top of it. And so, of course, Microsoft, as we've seen, has, Linux is now becoming a first-class citizen in the Microsoft world. It's shipped in box, and obviously with Azure, they have a huge investment in Linux-based platforms. And I think that, especially with Azure, where they have Windows and Linux endpoints available to rent, and they need to do observation on both these things, as well as with Defender. They have Defender for Linux and Defender for Windows. It just makes sense. It's a unifying technology for doing network observation.
So if you will have an eBPF filter for the network side, that is actually like cross-platform, not just over the x86 versus ARM, but moving it between Linux and Windows, that will work well.
Exactly, because it abstracts away the x86 or ARM or even the OS layer system calls. And so it has its own set of APIs. At the end of the day, you implement functions that get network packets. And you could do things like not only implement load balancing, but you could do anti-DDoS, or you could do generic telemetry collection, trying to figure out what DNS lookup requests a particular endpoint is doing, anything that you want from there.
Right.
Cool. So, if you were to point someone to who's new to fuzzing, where would you tell them to start?
Right. So actually, I get excited about this topic, so I'll try to keep it brief. But about 5 or 6 years ago, we entered into what I'm considering a fuzzing renaissance, because famous researcher Michael Zaleski released a tool called AFL, American Fuzzy Lop. And this incorporated code coverage feedback into traditional mutational fuzzing and created a kind of genetic algorithm around that, where basically brute force search, but done at a very high speed and trillions of times, will eventually produce a refined output that ultimately finds bugs. And so AFL++ now is the version, the most immediately available tooling for researchers. And if you're a developer, actually built into LLVM is something called libfuzzer.
Yeah.
And so you can write a function that interacts with your APIs, and you receive fuzzy data, and then you can just send it to those APIs and whatnot. So those are the easiest ways to get into it. I highlighted a new technology that's about a year old called WTF fuzzer, because those other two fuzzers aren't really capable of targeting kernel code. And so WTF is a snapshot fuzzer that allows you to take a memory dump from any x86 target, x64 target, Windows or Linux or other, and perform fuzzing from there at user or kernel arbitrary locations.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It was nice, it was an interesting talk, and well, there's one more speaker, so let's go out and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks.
This is my first time to Sweden, and just shout out to the SecT crew and everybody making this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Super interesting talk.
Thanks.